Oh, I'm glad you're here. Check this out. Oh, look at them in all their majesty. Hello everybody, and welcome to the Whiskey Dictionary, where I do the research to try to teach you a little something about what you're drinking. Tonight I want to talk to you about Redbreast 12. Now this is similar to a lot of other Scotches and Irish whiskeys that I've covered, where when looking into the history, it becomes very apparent that what they care the most about is their heritage, and specifically how long they can claim they've been a distillery, and almost to the point of ridiculousness. So a lot of Scotches especially, but Irish whiskeys too, they stretch every possible imagination and every possible fact that they might have just a little bit further to try to prove that they're that old. So for example, Redbreast claims that it started in 1857, and they're kind of technically not wrong, but what happened was there was a company called W&A Gilbey, and W&A Gilbey were wine importers, and they did that quite a bit. They imported a lot of wine, and that was their business for many years. Now, around 1874 is when they first started making whiskey. They happened to have a still on site before that, but they weren't really making whiskey prior to 1874. Now, here's where it gets silly. So, what they were making there, and I'm going to read these names off because no way I would have remembered them. They were making Castle UP Irish whiskey, and it was 33%, which is considered underproof, and they actually even would say UP, underproof. Then they also had Castle UV Irish whiskey, which was 17% underproof. And then they also had Castle DO Irish whiskey at full proof. Finally, a whiskey, or at least by any stretch of the imagination. Now, here's the thing. Skipping ahead to 1912 is when they first introduced Redbreast 12. And at that point, it was more of a renaming of something that already existed called JJ Liqueur, whiskey 12 years old. So that's interesting. To me, they weren't selling whiskey until probably a few years before 1912. At least, I mean, maybe you can count their foolproof stuff, but I would think it's a far stretch to say that they started making whiskey in 1857, and that's where their heritage starts. I don't know. Maybe it's a little bit of a soapbox kind of thing, but it's a little silly, you know? Like, I've seen some absolutely ridiculous years when researching whiskeys where they're like, we started back in the 1400s when somebody discovered that they could grow grain on their property. It's like, no, that doesn't start your distillery any more than me picking some weed out of a cornfield makes me a distiller. I don't know. Wheat out of a cornfield. Anyway, okay, whatever. Like I said, soapbox over. So here's the thing. Funny story that I did find while researching this, completely not related to the heritage, is around the 1920s in Ireland, it was a trying time, right? I mean, I think that's pretty well known. People were poor and people had trouble buying pretty much anything, especially luxury item like whiskey. But the priests in Ireland were pretty well connected. They had plenty of money, and, you know, that tends to happen. Poor people, and the church always does really well. So what happened were the priests would buy Redbreast 12, so much so that it became known as the priest's bottle, and it was known as such for quite a while. So I thought that was interesting. Now, there was a downtime in the 1980s where Redbreast was not made whatsoever, and this was around that whole Irish distillers situation where they were pouring money into Jameson, and I mentioned this all in the Spot Whiskey episode, which you can check out up there. But they stopped making whiskey for about 10 years. Now, the funny thing is they didn't get rid of the whiskey, so the whiskey's just sitting there, kind of aging. And that kind of worked out well because there's certain whiskeys that have been sold, I'll talk about in a few minutes, that are from the early 80s. So anyway, in 1991, they relaunched Redbreast 12. And new labeling, maybe a new mash bill, not a new mash bill, maybe a new way of, new taste. But in general, relaunch of Redbreast. And what you know today started in 1991. So regarding the rest of their expressions, they have the 12. They have the 15-year was released in 2005. They have the Cask Strength released in 2011, which I'll be talking about later this week. And then 2013 saw the 21-year-old, and 2016 saw the Lestau edition. Now, I'm probably going to go over the Listau edition at some point maybe even this year, because I actually personally really want to try it. I've never tried it before. So if you've tried that before and you think it might be worth my time, let me know in the comments. But there's other bottlings out there, and some of them are pretty cool. Now, especially this one called the Dream Cask. There's actually two of them, but I'll talk about the first one that they released. This was at during the World Whisky Day in 2017, which I believe, I'd have to look back at my notes, but if I can find it, I'll put a link up here. A lot of the whiskey tubers did like a big deal on World Whisky Day 2017. We all got together and we all did this all-day stream. It was one of the first of its kind, actually. It was a pretty cool day. It was either 2017 or it was 2016. Either way. During World Whisky Day 2017 was released this Redbreast Dream Cask, and it was a 32-year-old bottling from 1982, and it was basically this guy Billy Lighton, who was is the master blender in Redbreast. And it was what he pictured as being the perfect representation of an Irish pot still whiskey. And it had just these sherry and Spanish oak notes, and it was amazing. And I can say that because I got a chance to try it. This guy, Brad Leclerc, he is lovingly known as a whiskey demigod among the whiskey tribe. He also has his own channel, and I'll link to it somewhere up there as well, called Cask Strength. It's more of like a chatting with a few other guys. So it's a pretty entertaining watch, so check him out. He let me try this, and it was what I would consider one of those life-changing whiskeys. It was absolutely amazing. I had actually had quite a few that day because we were at the Bastard's Ball, and it's still just like, it was almost like I sobered up for a sec, and I tried it, and it just was incredible. And I will actually completely remember what that whiskey tastes like for probably several years, at least until I get a chance to try it again. So they did another one, which was more of a rum cask finish. And that was in the 2018 World Whisky Day. And it wouldn't surprise me or maybe 2019. Wouldn't surprise me if they continue to do that every few years or so, because why the heck not, right? It made a big splash. Actually, I believe when they released that rum cask finish one, they sold out of about 900 bottles in, I think, 14 minutes. So it was, it does pretty well when it comes out. All right, let's go ahead and give this a nose and a taste. So one of my viewers had requested, because he actually missed that I used to pop the bottles on the channel, so here we go. All right. I think I've had better pops, but I'll take it. Now the color on this is fantastic. Look at that. That looks beautiful. I often like to do this, put it up against the head, because it gets a good contrast of color. So let's go ahead and give this a nose and a taste. So the nose of this is a little bit heavy, actually. Some would call it oily smelling. I would call it more of like, kind of like a heavy almond, sort of nutty, kind of like earthy tones in the nose as well. Maybe a little bit of ginger root, little orange peel in there. There's actually like a lot going on this nose. I'm gonna say Honeydew Melon as well. It's pretty light, but it's also pretty fruity. But it's also, I said it was heavy and I said it was light. Let me explain that. So when you first nose this, you're gonna get, let me see, what would be a good reference? All right, so think about smelling Jameson, right? It's a universally known to be pretty light and crisp kind of nose. And then think of something almost like a high ABV cask strength style bourbon, or maybe even like a really high ABV scotch or something, where you've got more depth to it. And you could tell right away that this has something more to it than just like, oh, apples and it's light and nice. So when I said heavy, I guess I more meant substantial. So. But it does smell a little bit light. You know, it's triple distilled, so it does have a very clean nose to it. All right, let's go ahead and have a taste. Cheers. Now here's the thing. Redbreast 12 does not have much of a finish to it. So most of what you're gonna get is on your palate and goes away pretty quickly. It doesn't sit in your throat, but it does sit on your tongue. So I guess I'm not sure how better to describe that other than you're not going to, like, sometimes you'll feel like a burn or you'll get like a real coating of your throat. In this case, it's mostly just it hits your tongue. Once it's off your tongue, you're not getting anything more. But I would say this has a nice body to it when it gets onto your tongue. You know, it coats the inside of your mouth for sure. It just doesn't last. It's like fruit stripe gum, for those of you that get that reference. All right, so heavy on citrus, specifically for me, lemon and orange. And let's try some more. You're getting some sherry, for sure. Not heavy on the berry side, which you usually get in a sherry. More in some of the... Actually, I might take that back. Some of this is changing for me. So I had some notes, and I'm finding this is kind of this is a common thing that I've found with this bottle so far. And I was going to go over this in the overall, but I think I'll go over it right now and then maybe give some more notes in a sec. What I find with this whiskey is if you try this as soon as you open it up, you're going to have a much different experience than even a couple weeks later. So what I think that you should do, and yeah, what the heck, I don't need to be quite so formal of giving my nosing into my overall opinion. This is what I think you should do with this whiskey. I think you should take a second glass. When you're trying this whiskey for the first time, I think you should pour one out and go with kind of that common rule of let it rest for 1 minute for every year. So open the bottle, pour it out, give it about 12 minutes or so. Maybe go 20 on the first pour. Then pour another one. And I want you to do a side-by-side tasting for yourself. I think this would be an interesting experiment for you to do because opening up a whiskey to the air has a pretty significant change reasonably fast when you're dealing with, maybe 10, 12 minutes or so. And I think that's something that this whiskey in particular will give you the opportunity to experiment with and see what you think. That being said, after a couple of weeks, I think it's going to routinely taste pretty good. Now, my initial impact of this whiskey was I've tried it at bars. I've tried it just out and about, never in a situation where I was really there to evaluate it. When I popped this bottle and I poured that first pour out of it, I was underwhelmed because I know that a lot of people like Redbreast 12, and I knew that I was missing something, which happens occasionally. I'm not perfect. So I tasted it and I tasted it again. And I just said, man, I'm going to make a video and say that Redbreast 12 is not good. I'm going to get just murdered in the comments. However, if that was the case, I would. That being said, after a couple of weeks, this thing tastes significantly better. And there's a world of depth here in the taste here. So I believe I said there's kind of a citrusy lemon and orange note, correct, to the taste. There's a little bit of sherry in there. It's also sweet. So it's sweet like brown sugar. So one good thing is, at least for me, I'm not getting heavy oak influence on here, which I don't think would be good for this particular whiskey. I think that would darken some of the flavors or mute some of the flavors. So in this one, there's also a creaminess as well, actually. I'm sure there's a huge pile of notes over here, or maybe over there. I never know which direction. It's backwards for me. Okay, anyway, so my suggestion of this whiskey, what should you do? I think that you should buy a bottle of this. And the reason for that is the experiment that I mentioned before. There are not a ton of whiskeys that I could suggest to you off the top of my head that have such a clear difference after being open for a couple of weeks. And if you guys have any others, put them in the comments as well. I'd love to kind of do a similar experiment with those. But I think this is a good one to practice nosing and tasting for yourself and see what you can pick out. Add a little bit of water. That does actually affect this particular whiskey in some good ways. You're going to get a little bit more muted on most of the notes, but you might get a couple extras, especially that creaminess that starts to stick out a little bit more after you've added some water. Some of the lemon and orange comes out a bit more too. So overall, purchase this bottle. I think it's a good one. Now, what I will tell you is later this week, I'm going to be covering the Redbreast Cask Strength. Now, this is a whiskey that I had a much different reaction to. So check the video out on Wednesday, and I'll see you then. thanks for joining me, and check out the whiskydictionary.com for a whole bunch of merch. I got lots of stuff, and I'd love to sell it. So I'm really looking forward to making my next batch of coins, so I got to sell some of those. So thank you all for joining me here on the Whiskey Dictionary, and I hope you have a great rest of your night. Cheers.